I used to believe in family, until the day I saw my own flesh and blood trying to erase me. The Low family estate in Aspen gleamed under the chandeliers, a monument to wealth, power, and something I couldn't name. My father's 70th birthday party had transformed into a grand gala that felt more like an execution. The kind where the knife wasn't in your back, but inside your chest, twisted with every look and word. I walked in my heels soft on the marble, the sharp echo of others' footsteps like a mocking soundtrack. I was already out of place the indigo dress I wore, an odd contrast to the satin and diamonds swirling around me. It wasn't the dress I wanted, it was the only one I could afford that didn't scream failure. I could feel the weight of every eye on me scrutinizing, judging, dissecting my every move. Look, who clawed her way back, my sister Evelyn spat from across the room. Her smile, if it could even be called that, was a weapon. What rescue program sponsored that dress? A ripple of laughter moved through the room, venomous and sharp. My mother's gaze passed over me like I was a stain on the fine china. She didn't need to say a word, her silence spoke louder than any insult could. Cassandra the disappointment. Cassandra the ghost. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't part of this perfect world. I kept walking, my feet steady but heavy, like every step I took was a rebellion. But as I made my way past the drinks table, my Uncle Murray's voice struck. Didn't you drop out of Yale? What are you doing now, helping retired prostitutes or something? Laughter broke out loud and vicious. I didn't flinch. Instead, I focused on the swirling ice in my glass, as if the cold could numb, the heat spreading in my chest. I glanced at my mother. She met my gaze, but only just. She didn't see me. She saw the failure she'd never forgive. She always had a fascination with failure. She said, her voice clinical, detached, not unkind, just cold. My heart cracked. Just a little, but enough. Enough for the cold air of truth to slip through. I'd known this was coming. I had come here to prove I could take it, to show that I could still be part of this farce. I wasn't prepared for how deeply it would hurt. But it wasn't until Evelyn stood champagne in hand to toast that I realised the full extent of their cruelty. A toast, she began, her voice dripping with venom, to the only Low who didn't finish college, doesn't own property, and hasn't achieved a damn thing, but still manages to show up like she belongs. The words stung, but I smiled a small, tight smile because I knew the truth now. I wasn't there for them. I was there for me. I wasn't going to crumble under their scrutiny. Not anymore. Not today. I turned to leave my shoulders straight, but before I could, the sharp sound of heels on marble interrupted the tension. "Excuse me, Madam Secretary," a voice called from behind me. My assistant stood in the doorway, clutching a folder, her face expressionless but urgent. "We need to review the updated child welfare policy before tomorrow's press call." It was as if the room froze. My mother's smile twitched. My brother's wine glass froze mid-air, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Because in that moment, I wasn't the daughter they expected to humiliate. I was Cassandra Low, the woman who had fought to become something else entirely. I wasn't their failure anymore. I was their nightmare. I turned slowly, my heels clicking sharply now. "Thank you for the meal," I said, my voice steady, but I have more important things waiting for me. And with that, I walked out, leaving them to their hollow applause. I was done being the joke. And for the first time in a long while, I realised this was just the beginning. I should have known the moment I walked out that night that my life wasn't my own anymore. Every step I took, each decision felt like a chapter in a book someone else had written. I had spent so many years trying to fit into a story that wasn't mine, one dictated by my family's expectations, by their cold judgments and their insatiable need to maintain their perfect image. But when I left that night, I was finally stepping into my own truth. The apartment in DC was nothing like the grand houses I'd grown up in. No high ceilings, no marble floors. It was small, cramped, tucked away in a run-down building 2 floors above a dry cleaner. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I entered my space, the weight of the day's humiliation pressing against my ribs like a steel band. I sat down on the futon that had once seemed like a new beginning, but now felt like the place where dreams went to die. There was no comfort here, no luxury, no glitz or shine. Just me and my thoughts. I opened the old notebook that had sat untouched for years. The ink was fading, the paper yellowed, but the words were still there, each one like a scar etched into my memory. It was from the time when I had left Yale, when everything was still raw. I had been on top of the world at Yale. Behavioural psychology, the top of my class, a future mapped out doors opening at every step. But none of that mattered when I met Alma. I remembered the heat that swelled in my chest when I saw her. The little girl locked in solitary confinement at the refugee trauma centre. She was only 11, a misfiled case tossed into a system that fed on the silence of its victims. I could see her now, the way she shrank into herself, trying to disappear from the world that was hurting her. It broke me. Watching her flinch when the male staffer kicked her bag across the floor. Watching her cry, unable to speak English, only wanting her mother. I had thrown up that night, in the bathroom. I could still taste the bile in my mouth. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming at me, but all I could do was stare at the tile, feeling like I was suffocating in a world where I was too weak to fix anything. The next morning I left Yale. No farewell. No ceremony. Just an email that said I was done. I thought it would be a relief. It wasn't. I knew my family would never understand. I could already hear my mother's cold, calculating voice in my head. You're wasting every opportunity people would kill for. And Evelyn, she was always the first to criticise. Look at you, she'd say. You've thrown everything away. But they didn't get it. They didn't understand that I couldn't live a life that wasn't mine. That I couldn't keep pretending I wasn't suffocating. So I left. But leaving wasn't freedom. The next week my mother had me committed. She signed the papers. I was locked away, trapped in a psychiatric ward for 31 days. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't delusional. I was just tired of pretending. Tired of carrying a legacy I never wanted. I remember the 6th day when my father came to visit. He stood behind the glass partition, looking smaller than I remembered. He wasn't the towering figure I had once seen. He looked broken. He whispered through the glass, "If you still want to live, let this go." I nodded. I didn't know why. Maybe because I was tired. Tired of fighting, of being the disappointment. Maybe because I still wanted to believe in some kind of love in that family. Maybe because I was still waiting for someone to choose me to love me unconditionally. When I was released, I packed my things and left. No goodbyes, just a one-way bus ticket to Washington, D.C. I didn't care that I didn't have a plan. I didn't care that I was starting over. For once, it felt like the first breath of freedom. The rest of it, the job at the non-profit, the work with displaced workers that all came later. It didn't matter how small it was. It didn't matter that no one cared who I had been. What mattered was that I was building something. From nothing. Slowly, quietly, but it was mine. And I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could survive without them. It's strange, isn't it? How the people who claim to love you are often the ones who hurt you the most. It's not the strangers who wound you. It's the ones who know your weakest points, who hold your past like a weapon ready to strike when it suits them. And no one knew me better than my family. They knew my cracks, my insecurities, my mistakes, and they used them like tools to build their version of me. A version that didn't belong to me at all. I was working in Washington when it happened, when everything came crashing back. It had been a quiet life for the most part. I was invisible, but I had made peace with that. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need their approval anymore. What I needed was to make a difference, to be part of something real. But then, like a storm gathering on the horizon, my family's whispers started creeping back into my life. My mother, always the queen of manipulation, sent an invitation. The 60th anniversary gala for Low Medical. An event where family would be celebrated and I would be nothing more than a ghost in the background, a reminder of the mistakes they'd swept under the rug. I had avoided them for years, burying myself in work in causes that mattered. But this time, I knew I had to face them. I was ready. I arrived at the gala alone, not a hint of glamour about me. No makeup artists, no designer gowns, just a simple navy dress and the familiar dull ache of anxiety tightening around my chest. As I walked through the doors, I could almost hear the murmurs before I even saw the faces. The Low family wasn't known for their warmth or acceptance. It was a dynasty built on wealth and perfection, and I was the blemish they couldn't scrub away. Evelyn was the first to notice me, her eyes flashing with a familiar venomous glee. "I hope you are not planning on speaking tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the words laced with malice. "I'd hate to see you embarrass yourself." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I simply met her gaze, my face expressionless, my heart a battlefield of old wounds and new strength. Dinner proceeded. The speeches were scripted as they always were. The Low name was toasted, the family legacy lionized. I wasn't mentioned. Not once. The absence of my name felt like a slap, but I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. And then, right when I thought the evening would end without a single ripple, my assistant Anna stepped through the doors. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't look for approval. She walked straight to me, her heels clicking loudly against the polished floor, the sound of her presence cutting through the tension like a knife. "Madam Secretary," she called, her voice clear and unwavering. "We need to review the updated child welfare policy before tomorrow's press call." The room went still. My mother's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing with confusion. Evelyn's face twisted with disbelief. They hadn't seen this coming. They hadn't prepared for this moment. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. In that moment, they saw me not as the failure they thought I was, but as the woman I had fought like hell to become. I wasn't just Cassandra Low anymore. I was someone they had underestimated, someone they had tried to erase. But here I was, standing taller than any of them, ready to leave behind the shadows of the past. I stood up, the quiet hum of the room still ringing in my ears. "Thank you for the meal," I said, my voice calm, controlled. "But I have more important matters waiting." I walked out, not with anger, not with rage, but with quiet resolve. I was done playing their game, done being the punchline. This was my story now, and it was just beginning. The sound of the city always calms me. There's something about the hum of traffic, the rush of people moving in every direction, the noise of life being lived in 1,000 different ways. Washington, D.C. was far from home, far from the golden chandeliers of Aspen and the cold smiles of my family. Here there was a kind of anonymity that wrapped around me like a blanket, and I needed that. I remember the first night I arrived, 2 flights of creaky stairs up to my apartment, the smell of the dry cleaner's laundry seeping into the walls. The futon was thin, uncomfortable, but I didn't care. It was mine. It was my choice. I wasn't living in the shadow of their legacy anymore. I was finally out from under their roof, from their rules, their suffocating expectations. I worked as an inventory clerk for a non-profit. The job didn't matter. It was just a paycheck. But what it offered me was freedom. Freedom from the past. No one here cared that I had once been top of my class at Yale, or that my family's name carried weight. In DC, I was just another face in the crowd. I focused on the work, writing policy briefs during the day, writing grant proposals at night. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was something that mattered. Slowly, I earned the trust of people who didn't know who I had been. I didn't need them to know. What I needed was to prove that I could stand on my own. But no matter how far I moved, no matter how much I buried myself in my work, the ghosts of my past followed me. Every email I sent, every report I submitted, there was a part of me still holding on to the girl I used to be, the one they couldn't accept, the one they called a failure. I buried that part of me deep, but it never went away. There were nights, quiet nights, when I'd sit in front of my computer, the glow of the screen the only light in my apartment. My hands would hover over the keyboard, and I'd ask myself, what if they never accept me? What if I had spent my whole life living in their shadow, letting their expectations twist me into something I was never meant to be? What if I was still that girl? The girl they told me would never be good enough. I kept working. It was all I could do. It was all I knew. And then, one night, I received a letter. It was handwritten, postmarked from the very place I had left behind the Low family estate. The letter was from my father. He had never written to me before, not once in all the years I had been gone. And the words so carefully penned in his shaky handwriting hit me harder than anything my mother or sister had ever said. "I wasn't strong enough to stop your mother," it began. "But I believed in you, always. If you're reading this, it means you've already surpassed us all." I sat there holding the letter in my hands, feeling the weight of it settle deep into my chest. My father, the man who had always been too silent to protect me, too passive to stand up to my mother's control, was finally acknowledging something I had known for so long. I had surpassed them all. I wasn't a failure. I wasn't the disappointment they thought I was. I was stronger than they could ever understand. That night, I went to bed the first night in years that I didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt on my shoulders. I had chosen my own path. I was no longer chasing their approval. I was chasing something else, something real. The next morning, I woke up and made my first real decision in years. I was going to push further. I was going to get out of the shadows completely. I wasn't going to hide anymore. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it never had been. And now, for the first time in my life, I knew I had the strength to walk it on my own. You think you can leave everything behind, don't you? You think that if you bury the past deep enough, it won't come knocking at your door. But the truth is, the past never stays buried. It waits for the right moment when you're not expecting it, when you think you finally outrun it. That's when it shows up uninvited and demanding to be reckoned with. It had been a year since I left my family behind. A year since I started to build something for myself in Washington, D.C. I'd moved up in the nonprofit world quietly, making a name for myself, no longer hiding behind the Low family name. But it only took one email to remind me that I couldn't outrun them forever. The email arrived on a Monday morning, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a child's drawing, a crude crayon-rendered house with two stick figures as holding hands. The sun had eyelashes, and in the corner block letters read, "You helped Mum. Thank you for not giving up on her." There was no signature, no name, just that drawing. It hit me in a way I hadn't expected. My heart thudded in my chest. I had been trying to forget, trying to tell myself that I had moved on. But that little drawing, that simple thank you, reminded me of the work I had done, the people I had helped. It reminded me of why I had left it all behind, why I had walked away from the perfect life my family wanted for me. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their legacy. I just needed to keep moving forward to do what I knew was right. But that damn drawing still haunted me. It was a reminder of what I had left behind, my past, my family, my struggles. And yet, it was also a reminder that I had done something that mattered. That evening, just as I was starting to pull together a new proposal for the non-profit, an unexpected call came through. It was my director, Martin. His voice was strained, a little too tight. "They want to meet you," he said. "The Vice President's office. They're reviewing appointments for a federal undersecretary role. One of the proposals you wrote caught their eye." I froze. For a moment, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. This wasn't just any proposal. It was the National Reintegration Blueprint I had worked on late at night, the one I had written under the pseudonym D.H. Reeves. I had chosen that name for a reason, because it didn't carry the weight of the Low family behind it. It was clean. It was anonymous. I hadn't planned on using my real name. But now they were connecting the dots. They had found me. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, the words on the page suddenly feeling foreign. I had been so careful. I had built this life, this identity from the ground up, and now it was all about to be exposed. I didn't know whether to laugh or to run. The next day, I did something I hadn't planned on. I sat down at my laptop and started writing. Not to my family, not to anyone else, but to my mother. I couldn't let this moment pass without telling her. Not to explain myself, not to gloat. I simply needed to tell her that I had made it this far without them. But as I typed the words, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the message I needed to send. I deleted the draft every line, and instead, I wrote one sentence and hit send. I will attend the 60th anniversary gala. Make room. I'm not coming alone. I didn't say who was coming with me, but I knew. The truth I had kept hidden for so long. The silence, the strength I had fought for in the dark, the quiet dignity I had carved out for myself, it was all I needed. I wasn't asking for their acceptance anymore. I wasn't seeking their approval. I was bringing the truth, and I wasn't going to let them ignore it. The gala was supposed to be a celebration, a grand orchestrated affair where my family would shine in front of the city's elite. A coronation, not a reunion. And I, the outcast, was supposed to sit quietly in the corner, smiling politely, pretending I still belonged. But what they didn't realise was that I had come prepared. Not with words, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Silence, clarity, and the undeniable truth that I had worked for everything I had. Everything I had built, I had done alone. I arrived at the Low Medical Anniversary Gala 2 days before the event, feeling the familiar weight of their expectations hanging around my neck like a noose. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the polished marble floors reflecting the faces of everyone who had ever judged me. Every laugh at my expense, every whispered conversation about my failure to live up to their standards. Evelyn was already there, draped in satin, smiling like she had been born for a podium. When she caught sight of me, her smile faltered just for a second, before it snapped back into place. She leaned in the smile, now tight, her voice barely a whisper. "I hope you're not planning on speaking," she said, her tone dripping with venom. "Because it would be a shame to see you embarrass yourself in front of all these people." I didn't flinch. I didn't need to respond. I simply met her gaze, my eyes steady, unyielding. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I wasn't here to beg for their acceptance. I wasn't here to perform. I was here because this time they were going to hear me. Dinner proceeded. The MC gave a speech about the visionary minds behind Low Medical, about the family's commitment to healthcare. But my name wasn't mentioned. Of course it wasn't. Why would they mention the daughter who had walked away? The daughter who had rejected everything they stood for. Evelyn took the stage next, her words wrapped in the same venom that had marked our entire lives. "Our family has always been committed to service." She began a pointed glance in my direction. "My sister too, in whatever corner she's been hiding in lately." The laughter was cold, mocking. The room buzzed with quiet amusement at my expense. I didn't blink. I didn't show them the pain. I had spent years learning how to remain still, how to make them think I wasn't affected, when in truth I was fighting every moment to keep my composure. But then the back doors opened and everything shifted. Anna stepped through her presence, cutting through the room like a beam of light. She didn't wait for anyone's permission or applause. She walked straight toward me, her heels clicking against the marble floor with precision. "Madam Secretary," Anna called her voice clear, strong, unwavering. "We need to review the child welfare policy before tomorrow's press call." It was a simple statement, but the effect it had was immediate. The room fell into stunned silence. My mother's smile froze. My brother's hand mid-toast remained suspended in the air. They hadn't seen this coming. They hadn't expected me to be anything other than the girl they could silence with a look. But now, in this moment, they saw me not as the failure they had always believed me to be, but as the woman I had fought to become. I wasn't their mistake anymore. I wasn't their embarrassment. I was their reckoning. I stood up from the table. It was as if the weight of years of humiliation had fallen away in an instant. I didn't need to say more. I didn't need to scream. My actions spoke louder than anything I could have said. "Thank you for the meal," I said, my voice steady, calm, powerful. "But I have more important things to attend to." And with that, I turned on my heel, my feet firm against the ground as I made my way toward the door. The sound of my heels clicking against the marble was the only noise that mattered now. I had walked away from them once before, but this time it wasn't because I had failed. It was because I had finally learned that my life wasn't theirs to control anymore. It's strange the things you carry with you when you leave. The weight of your past isn't something you can ever truly shed, no matter how far you run. You think you can outrun the pain, the judgment, the whispers, but they cling to you quiet and insidious. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's expectations, the sting of their cruel words, the suffocating knowledge that I would never be enough in their eyes. But something had shifted. It wasn't the gala or the press or the moment I stood there quiet and unshaken in the face of their scorn. It was something deeper. I was done playing their game, done hiding in the shadows of their wealth and power. I had spent so long trying to prove that I was worthy of their approval. But what I realized that night as I walked away was that I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to bend to their will or live in the box they had created for me. I had made my own way, quietly, steadily in the darkness, where no one could see. But now I was ready to step into the light. The phone call came the next day, the same day I had walked out of the gala. It was Martin again, but his voice was different this time. Sharp, urgent, tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "They're looking at you," he said, "the VP's office. They want to offer you the Undersecretary role, the Undersecretary of Social and Civil Recovery. The role was mine for the taking if I wanted it. It was everything I had ever worked for, the chance to make real, lasting change on a national scale. But it wasn't just the position that mattered. It was what it represented. It was the chance to show the world who I really was, to stand tall and proud, and to let everyone know that I hadn't been broken. I had risen. I didn't hesitate. I accepted the role. I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. I wasn't going to be the forgotten daughter in the corner. I was going to be seen. I was going to make my mark not with their approval, but with my own strength. But my family, of course, wouldn't make it easy. As soon as the announcement went public, the whispers started. The press was already digging into my past. The headlines were ruthless: Low Medical's forgotten daughter takes high office. The questions were already forming, the doubts and accusations rising like waves against the shore, and I knew it wouldn't stop there. They wouldn't just let me walk into that office unchallenged. The Low name carried weight, and they would use it to try and tear me down. But I was ready. I had spent too long hiding, too long shrinking into myself. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. Not this time. I walked into the office on my first day as the Secretary of Social and Civil Recovery, with my head held high. The buzz of reporters outside the questions already mounting didn't faze me. I had prepared for this moment. I had spent years learning how to hold my ground, how to stay calm, how to never show fear. What I didn't expect, though, was the video that came through my inbox later that afternoon. It was a grainy clip, the camera shaky, but I knew instantly what it was. My sister, Evelyn. Her voice clear as she spoke to a reporter on Star CBS Denver Morning. "I love my sister," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But Cassandra, well, she has a documented history of self-harm. Our mother had no choice but to place her under psychiatric care. It was the only way to save her life." The video cut off before the host could respond, but the damage had already been done. The smear campaign had begun. Evelyn had weaponized my past, my darkest moments, to try and discredit me before I even stepped into the role I had worked for. But this time, I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to let them use my pain against me. I sat at my desk that evening, staring at the screen. I wasn't angry. I didn't need to be. I knew what I had to do. I didn't scream. I didn't lash out. I simply moved forward. I focused on the work, on the policies I was creating, on the people I was helping. I was building something real, something that could not be taken down by lies. A few days later, the media storm only intensified. A column appeared in the Centennial Ledger, the paper known for its ties to my family. The headline hit like a punch to the gut. "Can someone with a psychiatric history be trusted with national social policy?" The smear campaign was in full swing, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Evelyn. The calculated malice, the clinical tone, it had her fingerprints all over it. They weren't just questioning my ability to do the job. They were questioning my worth, my right to exist in this space. But I wasn't backing down. I was too far in now. The storm had already begun, and there was no turning back. There's a certain weight that comes with success. People often talk about the sacrifices you make to get there, but they never mention the cost of holding your ground once you're finally standing tall. You fight for years, but the moment you gain some semblance of power, the world shifts under you. Every move you make, every decision you take comes with the knowledge that there's always someone waiting for you to slip. And slip I did. It wasn't one thing, it wasn't a single mistake. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of everything I had worked so hard to build. My family knew how to play the game of power. They had learned it long before I ever knew the rules. The whispers started when my father's name was brought up in connection with my work. Low Medical's ties to certain funding sources, whispers of misappropriated funds, and the shadowy involvement of people from my past, people who had long ago been buried beneath the weight of the Low family legacy. At first I ignored it. I thought, let them talk. They'll say anything to undermine me. But soon, I couldn't ignore the cracks. The quiet way the public turned against me. The media, once a curious observer of my rise, now began to frame me as a liability. They couldn't just discredit me. They wanted to erase me completely. The breaking point came when the rumours turned into something real. The financial misappropriation scandal began to leak. The Low family's empire was built on foundations of lies, and now the truth was being revealed piece by piece. It was my mother's name on the documents. The signature, clear, the corruption undeniable. Edith Low, the woman who had manipulated everything in her life from her children to the public, was at the centre of it all. I didn't need to say her name. I didn't need to draw attention to her role in all of this. The evidence was there and it was damning. The family empire was crumbling and all I could do was watch. I remember the moment when the headlines came through. The Low Hospital Network had lost its licenses in 3 states. Stocks plummeted overnight. The reporters camped out on every street corner, flashing cameras and asking questions they already knew the answers to. My name was on the tip of everyone's tongue, and this time, it wasn't because of my work. It was because of the wreckage my family had left behind. In that moment, I knew what it felt like to truly lose everything. The life I had worked so hard to rebuild, the future I had fought for. None of it mattered when you were standing on the edge of a family's downfall. I could hear Evelyn's voice echoing in my mind. You're wasting everything people would kill for. But this time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel responsible. My choices had led me here, but they weren't the reason the Low name was falling apart. They had done that to themselves. But there was one thing they didn't understand. They had built an empire on lies, on control, on manipulation. And when the truth came for them, there was nothing they could do to stop it. I thought I had lost everything. But what I was starting to realise was that I had already found something far more important, my own truth. As the family's legacy crumbled, my past faded into the shadows, and I saw what really mattered. I wasn't here to fight for a name or a legacy. I was here to fight for the people who didn't have anyone else to stand up for them. I was here to create something real. And if the Low family fell because of me, then it wasn't my fault. They had made that choice long ago. When the dust settles, you realise something important. Success is fleeting, but survival stays with you, etched deep in your bones. The headlines that once screamed about my family's fall now seemed like whispers in the background of my life. They could try to drag me down with them, but I had already walked away. I wasn't fighting for their approval. I wasn't seeking redemption in their eyes. I was fighting for myself. The fall of the Low family dynasty was a story that would dominate the news cycle for weeks, maybe months. It was a scandal, a tragedy, a perfect storm of greed, corruption, and betrayal, but it wasn't my story to tell anymore. I wasn't interested in becoming a footnote in their narrative. What I cared about now was how I could create something better, something that would outlast all of them. I didn't need revenge. What I needed was to build, to create a future that wasn't tied to the Low name, to my family's legacy. So I started the Root Rising Foundation. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a headline-making event. But it was real. It was mine. I had chosen to heal. The first headquarters was opened in Arizona, a place that had been both a starting point and a turning point in my life. It was there at a refugee trauma centre that I had first realised what I truly wanted to do: help people who had no voice, people who had been forgotten by society. And now, years later, I was in the position to make a difference. The work was gruelling, the building was small, the walls in need of repair, the floors old and cracked. But it didn't matter. We didn't need luxury. We needed a space for those who had no place to go, for the girls who were trapped in a system that ignored them. This wasn't about funding from my family or my name. It was about the girls who had never been given the chance to fight for their future. We started with nothing. But I wasn't afraid of starting from scratch anymore. I wasn't afraid of being small because I knew what it meant to be invisible. I had spent so many years hiding in the shadows, afraid of my own power, afraid of what would happen if I actually stood up and claimed my space. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their validation. I just needed to know that the work we were doing mattered. The day of the first official launch of Root Rising came quietly without fanfare. There were no reporters waiting outside, no cameras flashing. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a spectacle. But the room was filled with young girls, their faces bright with hope, their eyes wide with possibility. These were girls who had known what it was like to be forgotten, to be invisible. And now they were here with a chance at something more. As I stood in front of them speaking about the importance of opportunity, of trust, of believing in each other, I felt a shift in the air. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the quiet connection, the unspoken bond that tied us all together in that room. I wasn't doing this for fame. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to my family. I was doing this because for the first time in my life, I had found something worth fighting for. And then, as I wrapped up my speech, I saw her, my mother. She was sitting quietly in the back row, her grey coat blending into the shadows. She wasn't there to make a scene, to take credit, to steal the spotlight. She was just there, watching, waiting. I didn't stop talking. I didn't let the moment shake me. I had already made peace with everything I had lost, but I still couldn't help the weight that settled over me as I finished. For years I had craved her approval. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to her, to show her that I was worth something. But here, she was not smiling, not acknowledging me, but simply present. And that was enough. After the ceremony, as the girls filed out, my assistant, Anna, handed me an envelope. It was worn, marked from the hospice centre where my father had passed away. I opened it slowly, the paper inside, fragile, the ink faded with time. It was a note from my father. Cass, it began, his handwriting shaky but clear. If you're reading this, it means you've faced your final fear. Don't ever let the world convince you that compassion is a weakness. It is the greatest strength you have. I sat there holding the letter in my hands, feeling the weight of it sink deep into my chest. My father, the man who had always been absent in so many ways, was finally giving me the one thing I'd always longed for: the acknowledgement that I had been right, that my choices, no matter how painful, had been the right ones. And then, as I stood in the silence of the room, I realised something else. I wasn't just the girl they had tried to erase. I wasn't just the daughter who had walked away from it all. I was a survivor. And more than that, I was someone who had chosen to write her own story, to forge her own path. And that story was just beginning. I never expected to feel this weight on my chest, the kind of weight that makes you stop, think, and reconsider everything you've ever known. The foundation was growing, the girls were thriving, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real purpose. But something still lingered, something unresolved. It wasn't guilt or fear. It was the quiet echo of everything I had left behind. The family, the dynasty, the people who had shaped me into someone I didn't want to be. The success of Root Rising had given me a sense of accomplishment, a sense of peace. But every now and then I would think of the Low name, of everything it had represented, and I couldn't help but wonder, what if they never truly saw me? What if I had spent my whole life trying to gain their approval, and all it had cost me was my soul? I wasn't looking for reconciliation. I wasn't seeking their approval. But as the days passed, I knew there was one thing I needed to do, one last thing before I could completely free myself from their shadow. I needed to make my peace with the past. It had been a year since the gala, a year since my family had begun to unravel under the weight of their own lies. But I hadn't heard from my mother. Not a word, not a letter, no apology, no acknowledgement. But when you've been ignored for so long, when you've spent so many years chasing after approval, that will never come, you stop asking for it. And in its place, you find something stronger, something unshakable. It was a quiet morning when I received the invitation. It wasn't from my mother. It was from Anna, my assistant, who had become more of an ally than anyone else in my life. "There's something you should see," Anna said, handing me an envelope. I opened it slowly, already dreading what it might contain. The letter inside was simple, short. "I'm sorry," just 3 words. But those 3 words held everything I needed to hear. For the first time in my life, my mother had acknowledged that I existed, that I wasn't a failure, that I mattered. It wasn't an apology for the years of manipulation, for the mental and emotional abuse. It wasn't an apology for the way they had broken me down, tried to erase me. But it was something I had never expected. And maybe that was all I needed. That night, as I sat in my office, looking over the plans for the next phase of the Root Rising Foundation, I realised something. The Low name, the Low legacy, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. The weight I had carried for so long of their expectations, of their judgments, it had no hold over me now. I wasn't running from them. I wasn't hiding from them. I had simply found something better. I had found myself. And as I stood up from my desk that night, my mind quiet for the first time in years, I knew I was ready to step fully into the life I had built. Not because of anyone's approval, not because of any legacy or family name. I was ready because I had chosen to be. The next morning, I flew to Arizona. The sun was just beginning to rise as I stepped off the plane, the golden light casting long shadows across the desert. It was there, in that open space, that I had found the freedom I had always been searching for. And it was there, in the quiet of the desert, that I would build something that would outlast everything I had left behind. It wouldn't be easy. It would never be easy. But it was mine. As I stood outside the first Root Rising headquarters, the girls already waiting inside, I knew the truth. I had no need to be anyone else. I had no need to seek their validation. The world had already been rewritten for me. I had rebuilt it from the ground up, and this was where my story would continue. This was where my roots finally took hold. As the journey continues, I'd love to know your thoughts. What part of the story resonated with you the most? Was there a turning point that really caught your attention? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your take on it. And hey, if you've been enjoying the content and want more of these stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you'll never miss an update. Let's keep this conversation going and build a community where we can share, learn, and grow together. Thanks for being a part of this journey with me.